Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Now we move to session 4, and from here on we will take each story in the Quran, analyze it, and see what we can learn about civilization and history. In this session, it is about Noah, peace be upon him, and the first civilization warning in human history. The story of Noah is often remembered as the story of the flood. But in the Quran, it is much more than that. It is the beginning of a pattern that repeats throughout human history. The story of Noah is not simply about water destroying people. It is about what happens when a civilization becomes morally exhausted, when corruption becomes normal, when truth becomes mocked, and when society loses the ability to recognize its own decline. The Quran presents Noah as one of the earliest prophets sent to warn humanity. It says, "Indeed, we sent Noah to his people, and he said, O my people, worship Allah. You have no deity other than Him. Indeed, I fear for you the punishment of a tremendous day." Noah's message was simple: return to truth, return to justice, return to moral balance. But the people of Noah refused, not because the message was unclear, but because corruption has already become deeply rooted within the society. The Quran repeatedly shows that opposition to prophets often begins with elites, people who benefit from existing systems. As it says in the Quran, the elite among his people said, "Indeed, we see you in a clear error." Notice what happened. Instead of reflecting upon the warning, the powerful attack the messenger. This pattern appears throughout history. When societies become deeply attached to power, to wealth, ideology, or social status, calls for moral reform often feel threatening, because truth challenges comfort and reform threatens corruption. How did they respond? The Quran also describes how Noah was ridiculed. It says, "And whenever an assembly of the eminent among his people passed by him, they ridiculed him." Mockery is powerful. It discourages people from questioning society. It turns moral concern into embarrassment, and throughout history, societies often mock reformers and moral voices and those who warn about future danger, because ridicule becomes easier than self-examination. The people of Noah were not necessarily lacking intelligence. Their problem was deeper. They had become morally blind. The Quran describes how they clung stubbornly to inherited systems. It says, they said, do not abandon your gods. Civilization often becomes trapped by habit, tradition, pride, and fear of change. People become emotionally attached to systems even when those systems are destroying them. And eventually, falsehood begins to feel normal. And also, one of the most remarkable descriptions in the Quran is how Noah's people reacted emotionally to truth. It says in the Quran, and indeed, every time I invited them that you may forgive them, they put their fingers in their ears, covered themselves with their garments, persisted, and were arrogant with great arrogance. This is not only theological rejection, it is psychological resistance. The Quran captures something deeply human. Sometimes people do not reject the truth because they cannot understand it, but because they don't want to hear it, especially when truth demands change. Also, it's evident in the story of Noah how they normalized corruption. Because when societies become accustomed to dishonesty, to arrogance, to exploitation, and moral decay, people gradually lose the ability to recognize wrongdoing itself. And once corruption becomes normalized, collapse begins silently from within. And about the flood. The flood in the Quran is not merely a natural disaster. It represents the consequence of long-term corruption. The destructions come only after repeated warnings, prolonged rejection, and persistent arrogance. As the Quran says, because of their sins they were drowned and admitted into the fire. The Quran focuses not only on the destruction, but on the causes behind it. Civilizations do not collapse without warning. Decline usually begins long before the final moment becomes visible. And look at the ark. The ark is one of the most powerful symbols in the story of Noah. It represents preservation, preservation of truth, preservation of conscience, preservation of moral clarity during times of widespread corruption. The Quran says, so we saved him and those with him in the ship, and we made it a sign for all people. Throughout history, renewal often begins with small groups willing to preserve truth when society itself begins drifting toward collapse. So those people on the ship, on the ark, were this small group that will start humanity again. Today, humanity faces extraordinary challenges. Despite scientific advancement, many societies struggle with moral confusion, social fragmentation, environmental destruction, loneliness, and loss of meaning. The story of Noah reminds humanity that civilizations rarely collapse suddenly. Often they weaken slowly through arrogance, through denial, through corruption, and through loss of moral balance. The greatest danger is not always external destruction. Sometimes the greatest danger is becoming unable to recognize decline when it is happening. The story of Noah is not merely about ancient people. It is about human nature itself. It is about the tendency to ignore warning signs, to resist uncomfortable truth, and to protect systems that no longer serve justice. The Quran presents Noah as the beginning of a timeless civilizational warning. No society becomes stable simply through material strength. A civilization survives only when it preserves the truth, humility, justice, and moral awareness. Civilizations often do not collapse because warnings were absent. They collapse because they do not see the warnings ahead of time. شكرا والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله.